Well, good morning, Christ Church. Good morning, Carol. Okay, it's not exactly high school reunion, but, it's kind of like that. I am so happy to be here. It's such an incredible thing for me to be standing here in this pulpit. I grew up roller skating on Walnut Street, just a few blocks away. And I have to tell you, you can't get here from where I used to be. I'm going to tell you more about that later, but first let's have a look at some readings. I really didn't plan to spend a lot of time on the parable of the seeds. Many of us have heard it over and over and over again. It's kind of a standard, and it's lovely. And Jesus in Matthew even spells out for us what it means. So the short version goes something like this. God abundantly and freely offers God's word, God's life to us. Pay attention. Don't allow fear or greed to distract you, and it will pay off for you and for others. There, sermon's done. We can go get our donuts now. Well, that was kind of the original plan, and I do love the donuts here. But one day last week, when I had been thinking about all of this, I was out walking near my neighborhood in Kansas City, and I noticed some of the bare earth that was showing through a sort of patchy spot of grass. And the soil was that pale brown that it gets when it's very dry, and it was dusty, and it was cracked, and it was only in the first part of July. And I started worrying. I was worrying about the farmers and their fields, and I worried about the birds and the other wildlife, and I started thinking about how dependent... Oh, wait a minute. Then it hit me. Where is the water in our parable? Where's the water? Everything else necessary for abundance is there. We have the sower and the seed and the soil and the sun, but no water. This seems especially odd for a desert people. No water. The water's there in our reading from Isaiah. For the rain and the snow come and water the earth, the abundant water of God, giving seed to the sower and grain to the eater. And there's the water again in our psalm. You visit the earth and water it. You provide the people with grain. So where is that water? It doesn't matter how faithful the sower, how abundant the seed, how wonderful the soil, how gentle the sun. If you got no water, you have no crop. Okay, I went back and looked one more time at our passage. And the water was there after all. Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the lake. He got in the boat and he sat there. And he told them many things, saying the sower goes out to sow. Well, that water was there all the time. It just wasn't where I expected it. It wasn't where I was looking for it. And it wasn't in the form I thought it would be. Okay, I want you to hold that thought. I'm going to return just for a minute to the little girl in her roller skates. I was pretty standard issue for my time and location. I was very fortunate, and I had all the resources of a reasonably healthy, happy life in place for me. I got to tell you, I was kind of a geeky kid. I pressed flowers in my grandmother's Bible. Should have seen this coming. I tried to be friendly and helpful the way you taught me in Sunday school and the way they taught me at home. And it would seem that all those necessities were well in place. But like my evident predecessors of a few thousand years ago, I got overwhelmed by the circumstances and by the influences in my life. And over time, I became distracted and afraid. And the seeds that ought to have flourished began to wither. I became parched, and I was cracking. And because I was looking for water in all the wrong places, I concluded that it didn't exist. I ultimately concluded there is no water to be found. I examined religion at that time and found exactly what I expected to see: hypocrisy and judgment. And those things are present with religious people because we're human. That's present in all human life. But what I was missing was the beauty and the light. I never saw or heard that the Spirit of God dwells in us. I somehow blocked out all of the time and the money and the effort and the creative love pouring out, including from Christ Church as it does today, pouring out of these very doors in aid of a troubled world. I never saw how you were here for each other. I never got that our tradition is so filled with joy that the mountains and the hills and the valleys sing and the trees clap their hands. The world was a mess, people were suffering, and I was wretched. As I said, you can't get here from there. You have even given me the job of proclaiming God's amazing grace. Well, one resource that helped bring me out from the desert was not at that time from the Bible, but from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it had to do with water. Emerson wrote, "Place yourself in the middle of the stream of power and wisdom, and you are, without effort, impelled to truth, to right, and a perfect contentment." Well, I had grown up swimming in the pools and rivers and lakes of the Ozarks, and I knew that feeling of peace and freedom that comes when you just let the current carry you. I knew from canoeing that things work best when you actually move with the river, and that it gets very exhausting when you paddle upstream. I've done both. I had experience, and some of you will get this, I had experience in letting the river help me around the log jams and around the other barriers that get in your way. And I also knew that the water itself, by how it looks and feels, the water itself will alert you to hidden dangers, like the jagged rocks that sometimes are just under that surface. And I started thinking, I wonder if this could be something like what they mean about God. I knew that good existed in the world. I could see it, but I couldn't match it up with the God I sometimes heard about in the press and some of the people who claimed to speak for him. So I temporarily just threw out everything I thought I knew, and I started praying to be shown God in a way that I could understand. And it began to happen. When I finally made my way back to church, I came with ears to hear. And I was, pardon me, drenched with countless images of the springs and the fountains and the lakes and the rivers of God. Baptismal guidelines to a meaningful life and a great cloud of witnesses to be with me. And eventually I came to understand that the seed is always here. The sunlight is always present. The water of life is always available, and that nothing is withheld ever. I had been like a fish swimming in the river, desperately searching for something to help me with my thirst. Or to revert to the imagery of the parable, I wasn't bad soil. I had just been sitting under an umbrella. Nothing could sprout. Who knew that all these things you had been trying to tell me were true? Who knew that all this stuff people have been saying for thousands of years was actually accurate? I think I always wanted to be a good person, but I don't think any of us, not one of us, is in church today just because we're trying to do the right thing. And certainly I hope not to avoid some ghastly metaphysical punishment. I believe that really while we're here is because the knowledge of the river of life is built into us, and we long to live as part of that. I've learned that St. Paul was right when he said that to set the mind on the Spirit is life and peace. In saying that the things of the flesh are death, by the way, because that has been taken a lot of directions, as some of you may know, he is not talking about our bodies. They were given to us by God. That's not where the sin, that's not where the missing God part is. It's our misguided attempts to find life apart from the creator and sustainer of life. So, like all things watery, life can get messy and muddy and overwhelming at times even, and I know you know this, in these sacred halls. But here we are. Here you are. Christ Church has been here a long darn time. You have been showing up day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, to carry the waters of life out into the world. The history and the waters here at Christ Church run deep. Okay, one more thing. There's another passage in Matthew that many of us are familiar with. It's the one where Peter sets out to walk across the waves toward Christ, and then he kind of overthinks it, and he plunges in. And Jesus chides him for his lack of faith. But you know, I think maybe, well, let's just consider anyway, that it's not the lack of faith that sometimes we assume. Perhaps, just perhaps, Peter's lack of faith has to do with fearing the water itself. Perhaps Peter was immersed in that lake, in that flowing life of the Creator and Spirit of the universe, and that's what he was afraid of, and that's why Jesus said, "O ye of little faith." Just maybe. Perhaps Peter missed the point that we are mostly made of water too. Well, I brought up my own story today, which we usually don't do from up here, but I kind of consider myself one of the poster kids, one of the miracle children here, a really reasonable example of the power of divine life. I went from being a very parched ground into a reasonably productive earth. In essence, the story that is embedded in all of our readings today, the story that is embedded in our entire tradition is my story. And it can be, or it is already, yours. This is our story, the story of transformation, the story of miraculous, abundant life. So in our parable, Jesus speaks out from the very waters. And if this story of abundance and joy and peace and the healing of the world doesn't seem quite to be yours today, try plunging in anyway. See what happens. Look at your friends and neighbors here in the pews for whom this seems to be bringing abundant life and joy and peace, and ask them what they're doing. Ask them how it's working for them. Sometimes it can be hard because we think, we're supposed to have everything together all the time, and many of us don't. But there truly is life here. You brought it to me. You're bringing it to me today. I've known you guys a long time, many of you. So let's just plunge on in. It is a great place to be on a hot summer day, and I am so happy to be here with you. Amen.